The recent NRM polls, marred with violence and rigging, has placed the president's surrogates in charge of the party in the crosshairs. How did a party built on a Marxist doctrine and led by an intellectual class of graduates descend into a thuggish outfit?
That conventional view is that, after 24 years of quote-unquote the dark days of Idi Amin and Milton Obote and the UNLA and that sort of thing, the NRM revive Uganda. Uganda comes out of the dark age and goes into a period of enlightenment. It's Uganda's second birth is 1986. There come these, ideologues, these Marxists, professing people, and it seems to be like a new world.
Perhaps the answer lies in the president's long stay, as the cracks in the NRM armor began to widen when cadres skilled in state craftsmanship were dropped. Some observers argue that as the president clung to power, he cut loose bourgeois comrades who he perceived as too critical of his views. Amongst those dropped include Kizza Besigye, who served as National Political Commissar, Mugisha Muntu, the former army commander, former Premier Amama Mbabazi, the late Eria Kategaya, who was first deputy premier, and local government minister Jaberi Bedandi Sali.
So all these people who woke up, including their Amama Mbabazi, who were shocked, they'd been told that after me is you're a success and all this, are shocked and amazed. And what amazes people like me is when you think that Amama Mbabazi was intelligence all these years, the inability of Museveni's comrades to read his mind. That's the part for me that's the most interesting. It's credit to be given to him, his ability to think, his crafty mind.
These were regime cadres who put in place a semblance of organizational discipline projected in the region and in the international sphere of civilized nations.
My view is that when you stay in office for very long, like we have had in the case of the NRM and President Museveni at the end of it, is that progressively, both intelligence and the people around you begin to manage your expectations by telling you what they think you want to hear rather than the actual truth.
Like shoots of a plant, these plain young thugs were eager to ascend to the top at the cost of indulging the puppet master's impulse.
They cannot tell the emperor that you need to dress up, you are actually naked. Because everybody begins to play safe and play the eating game rather than we have a problem here now. If it continues, it's likely to create us this problem. We need to sort it now like this so that tomorrow we get better.
To create another fallacy, the president appointed hundreds of presidential advisors to fit his clientele patronage schemes. However, a researcher, Yusuf Serunkuma, acknowledges that most of the advisors only get a chance to see the president on television.
When you read Matembe's book, Matembe talks about how Museveni says what type of politics do these people know. So he advises himself. He has so many advisors. My friend Mwenda, before he became washed, he would say all Museveni's advisors actually meet him at functions, and even there, it is him who advises them, right? So, it's like a sole candidate's party.
It is what to some observers culminated into the unprecedented mess as the party decided to hold its primaries to elect flag bearers without a proper register and line up behind candidates, which in the conventional wisdom of the organizers of this election would control the spread of COVID-19. But with the hindsight, the old method of casting a ballot, if regulated, could have offered a safer method to combat the spread of the virus. For commentators like Yusuf Serunkuma and Leonard Okello, the pretenses of internal democracy were dispensed with the departing old guard, which attempted to guide the president whenever he went astray.
A lot of the people coming in are fresh, new, young, and the next parliament is likely to be very young, much younger. I think it's going to be much more younger. The older people will be fewer and fewer, in my view, the way things are going, and which I think is good for the country, actually. But the fact that because many of them will be novices in the political space, and the few who are there will also be still learning. The age group of the 30s and early 40s will also still be learning. That group will come into a space of a few very highly experienced persons, including the person of the president and others around him. So again, the dynamics of this is such that people will continue to be in more of a survival mode rather than people have a dream an agenda and a passion to shape the country for the future. That's the challenge we are dealing with.
Amongst the list of departed cadres includes those who put up flak against the president at the National Leadership Institute at Chankwanzi in 2003 was Jaberi Bidandi Sali, who was part of the inner sanctum of the regime. Bidandi Sali had just led a campaign to have the president re-elected in 2001 on the premise that this would be his last term. Museveni, during the 2001 polls, faced Besigye, who had contested on the protest ticket against dictatorial tendencies emerging in the NRM. He had articulated in a document he authored in 1999, and he was court-martialed. Eventually, the number of competent cadres who had worked as troubleshooters began to diminish. This loss in merit-based skills cut across civil service, the army and politics. Like the army, which occupies the superstructure of governance, lost some of its smartest officers who superintended over a fused role as military officers, largely overseeing organizational politics of the regime.
So that decade, 2000, 2010, was a decade that Museveni came to life as an autocrat who wasn't living, who wasn't about to leave. It's in that decade that he even appoints his wife as minister. Right, he's promoting many of his closest relatives and clansmen into top positions in the military and in many ministerial positions. Right, it is that time that he comes full circle as an autocrat and a monarch of some sort.
It takes us back to my description of the NRM's history. When I was careful to say, going by conventional wisdom, they were Marxist, Pan-African organization bent on, reviving Uganda and all this. But if you really get down to it, when you take away all the pretense and come to understand, as I said, the benefit now of hindsight, nearly 35 years later, the NRM really was the single project of a one man called Yoweri Museveni. For NASA, that restlessness for Montare school, that peculiar thing about him,
For instance, Henry Tumukunde, then a spy chief, played a key role in the re-election of the president in 2001. So was the late Noble Mayombo in 2006, perhaps the most difficult election President Museveni navigated against Kizza Besigye, who exploited a groundswell of resentment against the lifting of presidential term limits. At the peak of the careers of these officers, the president was able to navigate some of the most delicate geopolitical conflicts and insurgencies. At the top of these conflicts was a confrontation with Khartoum, which sprouted up Joseph Kony and his acolytes and provided intelligence to the Allied Democratic Front to set up base in Buseruka, Hoima in the early 1990s to sabotage Uganda's plans to start oil exploration. These officers also involved in Uganda's battles in the DR Congo against Seseseko Mobutu, Kisangani battles and the offshoot Clark and Dagger games with the Kigali regime. But Timothy Kalyegira, a journalist and researcher, believes that the NRM has always projected a charade of democracy from day one in office, and as the gloss began wearing off, things fell apart.
The evidence, if you actually look at newspapers at the time that are not the government media and the Western media, if you look at DP publications like Citizen, Ngabo, you're amazed from day one, as in Take Power, 26th of January, 27th of January, chapter 1 begins of the looting, the thuggery and the everything. That's the amazing part. That all this evidence is there, but people still have this perception of Uganda started off well with the NRM, everything is okay. Then gradually the overstaying power destroyed them. Go read those publications.
He urges that to be able to create this fallacy, the party crafted a deceptive media image it sold to the Western powers.
I guess if you had to create like the 11th of the 10-point programs, I would say point number 11 is master the media, especially the international media, the Western media. Know how to deal with them, manipulate them. It began in 1984 when they invited the South Magazine correspondent William Pike to visit them, and he starts writing these glowing articles about them. So the great diplomatic and foreign policy triumph of the NRM, which was replicated with the RPF in Rwanda in 1994 and onward, 1994, was the ability to understand that the Western media will make or break you. You must deal well with them.
Everybody rallied behind Mr. Museveni, except a few people. And up 1994, when the Constitution is made, there was still, the 1994 Constitution, there was still goodwill. We are building consensus. We are building a constitution. there was a lot of goodwill from Ugandans to build with the NRA, right? So it's after, you can take it to 2000.
If you're used to a Uganda army with people like Idi Amin, Mustafa Dresi, Basilio Okello as the top commanders, I can see why General David Tinyefuza, Jim Ohwezi, Yorem Seveni Salim, so these people who speak English, who went to university, some are lawyers, sound smart, and I can see why that aura basically helped them.
The president today can rely on a few cadres with intellectual rigor and ability to project and articulate the vision of the regime. For instance, the senior presidential advisor in charge of special duties, David Mafabi, is one of the few articulate cadres. But with the numbers diminishing, the president is overstretched as he attempts to fix the problems in his party. As he grows older and lacks the vigor of youthfulness, his ability to put out emerging fires in every pocket of the country could diminish. Only last week, Museveni held a series of meetings to address disputes in the districts of Sembabule, Kiruhura and Kazo. One of those disputes involved his family as the Maogola North. In the Flashpoint Sembabule district, the race was suspended during the NRM primaries, which pits his brother Aine Kaguta against his daughter-in-law Shatsi Musherure.
He came knowing that violence, intimidation are some of the issues that have affected our electoral process.
He called me, I stood and said, this is my brother, but he's old enough, he has a right to stand, so I wanted to tell people that I did send him, but he has a right to stand.
Museveni will be seeking to extend his stay in power for nearly 4 decades in the next general elections. With the trappings of an imperial presidency, some of his critics claim that without his cadres to appraise him, it has been easier for the president's relatives to get involved in politics and seek coveted positions.
The other institutions are symbolic. You have a parliament as symbolic. You have a judiciary as symbolic. You have a press as symbolic. You have advisors as symbolic. But your wishes is what happens.
With the constitution amended shamelessly in 2005 and 2 years ago, and all these things we've seen, essentially we go back to animal farm. So all along it was just, it really was just to remove the farmer and replace the farmer with certain animals. That's what it was.
But as the president reclines to his seat at the end of a long, tiring day, he will nostalgically look back to the good old days when he had a sea of smart cadres to find answers to the country's problems. Irene Abalo, NTV Panorama.